Okay, now is the time for the negative cross-examination of affirmative. Turretinfan, you have 20 minutes to cross-examine Mr. Albrecht. You may begin when you're ready.
All right, Mr. Albrecht, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Some of them will be closed-ended, meaning I'm going to be looking for a short answer, and some will be open-ended, meaning I'm looking for an explanation. For example, if I say, does the Bible say Jesus is God? That would just be a yes kind of question. If I say, why do you think that? That would be a kind of a longer one. And I'm going to try to keep it. I'll try to be clear about which type of question I'm asking to kind
Okay,
of
no
move it along.
problem.
So I have a ton of questions I'd love to ask you.
Well, we do have 2 cross-examination periods, so that's a good thing.
Exactly. All right. So, with respect to the question about Scripture, do you believe that Scripture itself teaches papal infallibility?
Yes. If you'd like me to
Okay,
elaborate on that, I can elaborate.
Yeah. So, where in Scripture is it only those 3 verses that you primarily raised, or do you think there are other passages as well?
Well, I think it's a really good question. I guess if I'm going to answer it in a cogent manner, I just want to be clear, and I want to point out that Bishop Gasser himself, the one who wrote the official explanation of the Vatican I teaching, he's not attempting to define or saying that the Church has defined a few of these verses. He's merely arguing from Scripture as the Church has traditionally understood the text. And for instance, Luke 22, he wasn't formally defining these verses. If I were to look to one verse that I think would hold the strongest weight among others, because I do believe that there's a lot of evidence that can lead us to the direction of this historical truth, I guess I'd have to go with Matthew 16:19. I believe that would be the strongest verse. That would be the one that I would hinge my belief on.
That was one of the ones that you'd mentioned. But aside from the 3 that you'd mentioned, the Matthew 16 verse, the John 21 verse, and the Luke 22 verse, did you have any others that you thought strongly teach this, or that didn't make it into your speech?
Right. You mean in explicit terms, teaching people infallibility? I just want to be clear that I do not even believe that, for instance, John or Luke are explicit in the teaching of papal infallibility. So I would have to say, whereas there are other verses that I could definitely bring up, I do not think that other than that one verse I pointed out to you, I don't think that this is explicitly taught in many other locations. So
okay,
I guess
what would be the top one out of the other, outside those top 3? Like, what would be number 4?
That would teach the doctrine of papal infallibility?
Yes.
Or that would be implicit in its in being put forth. Would that be all right? Even if it's just implicit?
Maybe let's just put it this way: the 4th best. I assume you put forth the 3 best verses. So what would be the 4th best verse in that same category?
Well, I think another really good evidence is in many locations of Scripture we can see that Peter is put forth as the first among the apostles, but of course that wouldn't be good enough to prove papal infallibility. Another would be his role in the Council of Jerusalem. Of course, I wouldn't take the position that this is explicit proof in this short area of papal infallibility, but I put that forth. I put the passage in Galatians forth. There's a number of areas that I could go into. Of course,
okay. Well, no, I think that answers my question.
Sure.
So let me move on to a different question.
Sure.
Luke 22, verses 24 to 34, 32, the one that Vatican I actually refers to.
Okay.
Is in that particular verse, is papal infallibility mentioned?
No, it is not. What is mentioned in this particular verse?
This was one of those.
Right.
Well, one of those closed ones. Then is a faithful exposition of the deposit of faith mentioned there?
Well, just so I can finish my previous question, I just want to, so that the listening audience can understand, Vatican I was not saying that papal infallibility is taught within this verse, and in fact, in Bishop Gasser's official relatio, he points that out rather clearly.
Well, that wasn't the question I was asking. My question is it mentioned? And I think your answer was no, it's not mentioned.
Right.
Would you also agree that is faithful exposition of the deposit of faith mentioned?
What do you mean by that? Could you break that down?
Well, if you remember, the Vatican I stated that there was there was a divine assistance that was promised him in defining doctrine
Right.
concerning faith or morals. So, is there anything here about defining doctrine in this verse? In Luke
Well, you
22?
can find in this verse, which is particularly the reason why Bishop Gasser put this forth in his Relassia, you can find the fact that Christ tells Peter to strengthen his brethren. And I believe the weight carried by the word stereorizon is important, but of course, as you pointed out earlier, that the usage of that term can be found in many other locations. And I wasn't attempting to say, well, look, we've got this one word here, and you can't find it anywhere else. This makes Peter, special, and nobody else has the ability to strengthen your brethren. In fact, to continue for a little bit longer.
I'm not asking about whether it says anything about it special yet. I may get to that just in a minute. But what I'm trying to ask here is, does it talk about defining dogma in this verse?
No, it does not, and that's particularly why
Okay.
I was trying to say that nowhere does the church say that this verse speaks of defining dogma. So I don't understand why you asked the question.
You'll have your time to set forth your position, but I'm trying to ask some questions here. The next question is this: what exactly is the promise that's made? What are Jesus' words to Peter here? His actual words.
The actual words are, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. As I pointed out, the Greek plural su.
I'm sorry. I meant Jesus' words, not your gloss, but Jesus' own words.
I'm actually reading directly from the exact words. I'm not reading from my own gloss. I'm reading directly what Christ says. He says, "I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail, and when you have turned back, strengthen your brethren." Those are the exact words that are used for Peter.
Okay. And does that promise that's made there relate to Peter's faith?
Absolutely. It says that your faith may not fail. And then it tells us, and when you have turned back, strengthen your brethren. Absolutely. It is in reference to...
Now, is there an explanation in the context as to what situation would challenge Peter's faith?
Absolutely. As we can see here,
my next question is, what was that explanation?
I'm attempting to get to that. As we can see in the verse, we don't have it doesn't confine us to only one possible scenario of Satan being able to sift the brethren, as we're told here. Satan has asked to sift you as wheat, but in answering that, we can see that it could be a number of different scenarios. But the fact of the matter is, Christ has prayed for Simon, singularly here, that his faith may not fail, and he tells him that he is to strengthen his brethren when he turns back.
So, if I can paraphrase, the situation that's going to face Peter in the context here is that he's going to be tempted to deny Christ 3 times. Is that an accurate characterization of what it is that is going to happen, and after that he's going to be converted and strengthen the brethren?
Absolutely. What we're reading here is the fact that Christ prays for Simon, singularly, that his faith may not fail, and as he tells him to shepherd his flock later, in another verse, actually, we see that he tells him to strengthen his brethren here. It is no doubt that later Simon Peter would deny Christ, but again, this verse in and of itself, I just want to make it clear, it isn't brought up by the church, nor am I bringing it up to say that this verse teaches papal infallibility in explicit terms, just so you can be clear on that.
When I look through Vatican I, and I look at the actual definition, and the paragraphs surrounding the definition, there's a lot of scripture that's leading up to papal infallibility, things that have to do with Petrine primacy, the primacy of the See of Peter. But eventually, when it gets to the topic of papal infallibility, I look in there to see what scriptures are being examined, what part of the deposit of faith is being considered. I think you yourself mentioned he has to do this. He can't just make it up out of thin air. He's got to take it
without
from the deposit of faith.
Without a doubt. He takes it from the deposit of faith. He takes it from...
So what part of the deposit of faith did he take this out of?
He mentions explicitly that this is taken not only from tradition, but from Scripture. And in fact, you're pointing out how a number of verses are brought forth. I just want to let you know that I believe Gasser brings forth over 40 different biblical passages, and not just these. A number of them are not even meant to be explicit in reference to papal infallibility, but of course, as I pointed out earlier, verses such as Matthew 28, of course, he's not attempting to use that as a proof for papal infallibility, but rather for the perpetuity of the office. But go ahead with the next question.
The Pope is the one who's defining this dogma. And it says that if you look at
The Pope is the one defining what dogma that can have clarification for that.
Well, let me ask you. Maybe I should. I'm kind of making it sound like an assertion on my part.
Right.
Question. The way what I'm trying to ask you is, it says, we teach and define as a divinely revealed dogma, and it says that we do this with the approval of the Sacred Council. Is that referring to the Pope defining this dogma, or the Council defining this dogma?
This is referring to the fact that this has been a historical truth from the very beginning. This teaching is not being defined or, as I said earlier, being brought up out of thin air. In fact, the official teaching, which was put forth by at Vatican I, the official explanation was actually written by a certain individual by the name of Bishop Gasser, and a number of the statements in there are in reference to the Church in totality. And indeed, it wasn't the Pope that sat down and wrote out the official explanation of this. I just wanted to let you know that.
Oh, the Pope didn't. So whose
the Relatio
whose name goes on this? That makes it official. Whose name makes it official? Is it the Pope or some bishop who helps him write it?
I think you're misunderstanding me completely. I'm talking about the official relatio. I'm talking about the official explanation of what was taught here at Vatican I. I'm talking about the explanation that is given by Bishop Gasser at Vatican I, which is a church council that defined the dogma of infallibility. That is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, you said again that the council, I think you said there finally, the council defined papal infallibility.
And the council would, absolutely, and the council would include the Pope, of course. I'm not excluding the Pope from this. What I'm specifically referring to, you see, a number of times you're bringing up a number of things taught within Pastor Aeternus, a number of statements being made and scripture being made, and I'm trying to explain to you that indeed the official explanation and a number of these areas were put together and were officially explained by Bishop Gasser himself, which is part of the reason why I'm explaining to you that Luke 22 was not a verse that was brought forth to teach, to say, hey, this teaches papal infallibility. It was, like many other verses, including Matthew 28 and a number of verses in the Old Testament as well, brought forth to show, for instance, Matthew 28, the perpetuity of the office, and in Luke 22, the strengthening of the brethren, which, as Gasser in his official definition explanation says himself, can also be applied to other brethren of the faith, as you pointed out yourself in your rebuttal speech.
When Vatican I, within the four corners of its conciliar documents, and in the official statements that actually bind the Church infallibly, allegedly, does it actually say here that we are or are not obtaining this doctrine from the scriptures that we're presenting? Does it say it one way or the other?
I think what you're missing the point that it does obtain the doctrine not only from the scriptures but from tradition as well. So absolutely, definitely. Okay. As I pointed out earlier, if you want to talk about arguing
with
the
strict tradition. You mentioned.
Let me just finish my sentence. As I was saying, if you want to talk about the strict parameters of papal infallibility, we can move to Matthew 16:19, which you haven't even touched upon. If you'd like, we can move to that, or we can move to another verse if you want.
I don't think I'd like to move on to Matthew 16. I think I'd like to stick with my question since it's my cross-examination.
Right.
And let's turn to tradition. What father of the first century taught papal infallibility?
I don't think, as I pointed out earlier, as Ludwig Gott pointed out, I don't think there's a single church father that speaks of papal infallibility in explicit terms. As I pointed out, there are a number of... Right. Well, let me finish my sentence before being interrupted.
No, I need to finish. I need to ask my questions. I don't need you to use up my time.
Well,
so the second...
Well, you did ask your question, and you didn't allow me to finish my sentence.
And it was a closed question. At least it was intended to be. I apologize if I gave the impression that it was supposed to be one with a long explanation. I just wanted a short answer to these questions. Okay. Was there a father in the 2nd century who taught papal infallibility?
Well, if you're looking for yes and no answers, I need to give clarification on certain answers. So just so you can know, if you ask me yes or no, there's some that need clarification. So when I say no, I wasn't done with my sentence. I was going to say, whereas there's some that don't explicitly teach it, there are a number, as I pointed out in Ignatius and a number of the fathers, that don't need to mention the Pope, but they do say, for instance, as Antioch mentions, he says, you are purified of every foreign color. He says that they are free from every false doctrine. I don't believe that he needs to mention the Pope explicitly for this to be held as truth.